When I was in college, a new book came out that promised to connect the disciplines of music, art, mathematics, and computer programming with a bit of philosophy thrown in for good measure. This book was Douglas Hofstadter's Gödel, Escher, Bach. It was a smash hit, winning a Pulitzer Prize in 1980. I found it revelatory and exhilarating, but also frustrating. While it hinted at the relationships between music and the other disciplines, I felt that these relationships were often superficial and that the book didn't explain how music actually works. I was particularly annoyed by Hofstadter's description of the works of J.S. Bach. He started the book with a discussion of Bach's musical offering. He illustrated the inception of the work with a quote from Forkel's biography of Bach. Bach asked the king to give him a subject for a fugue, in order to execute it immediately without any preparation. The king admired the learned manner in which his subject was executed extempore, and, probably to see how far the art could be carried, expressed a wish to hear a fugue with 6 obligato parts. But as it is not every subject that is fit for such full harmony, Bach chose one himself, and immediately executed it to the astonishment of all present in the same magnificent and learned manner as he had done that of the king. There are a number of things that are telling in this account. First, that Bach refused to improvise in 6 parts on the king's theme. There's some evidence that people, even master composers, have trouble perceiving more than 3 parts at a time, and that an attempt by Bach to improvise so many parts on an unfamiliar theme might have led to catastrophe. This implies that Bach needed some kind of preparation. There is the misconception amongst non-musicians that improvisers make up music out of thin air. This is not the case. Improvisers have a wide variety of pre-learned patterns that they may choose from. They tend to improvise over and over on the same themes, the same chord progressions, the same bass lines. It's still impressive, but it's not as miraculous as you might think. Bach did eventually write a 6-part fugue based on the king's theme. He went home, and he worked the fugue out on paper using standard contrapuntal techniques. This should have allowed him the leisure to compose a perfect contrapuntal accompaniment to the king's theme. But it didn't. Here's the opening of the fugue. Note that the first statement of the theme begins with a minor third, followed by a major third, followed by a second. The second statement of the theme is in the dominant. It opens with a minor third, followed by a major second, followed by a minor third. This is a very small change, yet Bach has obviously changed the theme on purpose. It's not a variation, it's not that Bach has changed the theme in order to transform its character. The change is so slight it might not even be noticed. I think that Bach made this change so that the counter subject, the new melody that Bach placed below it, worked better. Had Bach kept the D in the melody, he couldn't have placed the E flat below it in the counter subject because that would have created a dissonance. Maybe he could have held the G through in the counter subject, instead moving it to an F sharp off the beat before moving back to a G on the next beat. This is probably marginally acceptable, but it produces a pretty directionless counter subject. The counter subject Bach actually used has a series of 3 upward leaping fourths. This sequence moves the piece forward, and it also mirrors the upward leaping fourths toward the end of Bach's theme. Bach changed the theme in order to write a better counter subject. He was willing to sacrifice the fidelity of the theme because he knew that no one would notice. In other words, as long as the effect of the theme remained, he was willing to cheat. This kind of cheating has to do with the exactness of imitation. When a theme, a subject, appears exactly as it did before, or maybe exactly as it did before transposed, we call that imitation real. When the theme is repeated with slight changes, we call it a tonal imitation. Tonal imitation is very common because it's difficult to create a counter subject that works well as a melody and fits perfectly with the subject. Remember in our first video on Counterpoint, we put together 2 children's songs. In certain places, this juxtaposition produced jarring dissonances. The pitches of one or the other of the melodies needed to be altered in order to turn those dissonances into consonances. That's what tonal imitation entails. It's a kind of cheating where a theme is altered so it might fit better harmonically with another voice. While Hofstadter is impressed by Bach's six-part fugue, he seems even more impressed by the canons found in the musical offering. Canons are more strict than fugues, and often they consist of a single melodic line. This single melodic line is usually punctuated with symbols that indicate where the other canonic voices should come in. So in a canon, the theme is used as a kind of counter-subject for itself. Here's an example by Philippe Rameau. When I was in high school, I was fascinated by canons, and I wasted many hours trying to compose them. Just as I failed to produce decent fugues because I didn't know that I could cheat, I also failed to produce decent canons because I didn't know the trick to it. I chose a Rameau canon for this demonstration because Rameau used it as an example in his Treatise on Harmony from 1722. The trick to writing a canon that Rameau described is not to write a melody at all, but instead to create harmony. Rameau explained you have merely to start with a melodic pattern and add to it as many parts as we want. From all of these parts, we compose a single air, constructed in such a way that the melody of one part can be succeeded agreeably by the melody of another. Each part follows in turn, and when the first has gone through all the parts, it begins again, always followed by the others as before, provided each part begins at the right time. Rameau made this static harmonic pattern more interesting by adding non-chord tones, and by altering the rhythm so that the melody fit the words. While canons can be very clever, and they're often quite beautiful, there's always a trick to them. They're not as miraculous as they seem. I started this video by talking about Douglas Hofstadter's GOEDEL, ESCHER, BACH. In spite of Hofstadter's admiration for Bach's musical offering, I think he misses the point of contrapuntal music, which is that it's a carefully worked out sleight of hand. Counterpoint forces melodies to fit together that probably shouldn't. This involves a certain amount of canonic technique, but it also involves a certain amount of cheating. I think that Hofstadter was probably aware of this. When discussing canons, he wrote, "Sometimes it is desirable to relax the tightness of the canon form. One way is to allow slight departures from perfect copying, for the sake of more fluid harmony." Still, his rhetorical stance in the book seems to be that music and art and mathematics and computer science are all about the same kinds of things. This is a little bit like comparing a physics experiment to a magic trick. Both are demonstrations of physical phenomena. One is real, one is fake. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with a magic trick. It's pure artifice, it's pure artistry, it's art. But I don't think we should be looking for truth about the physical world in art, in a magic trick. Many of my students object to my use of the word cheating in describing contrapuntal techniques. I can see them cringing when I use the word. But that makes me wonder what kind of reaction I would get from my colleagues who also teach counterpoint. But I still use the term because it gets the job done. It vividly expresses the fact that counterpoint is not an exact science. Despite having a myriad of rules, it's an intuitive art, and sometimes, many times, the imagined work is impossible to bring into being. And yet, the imagined work is brought into being, through sleight of hand, through cheating. Counterpoint is one big magic trick.